Deputy Miklos. I want to say thank you to you, first of all, for coming in today and for indulging me in this interview, because honestly, I've been wanting to talk to you about all of this stuff for a long time. So it's a good opportunity for me to go face to face for a change. So thank you for saying yes to the interview. Before we start off anything, I'd like to just ask you, first of all, what prompted you to get into policing? Because you're like a medical kind of guy. So what's the deal with? How did it happen?
Yeah, so I used to run a part-time martial arts school in the Dallas area, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and for many years in the inner city, and I had a lot of students that were police officers. I had students that were from the Dallas Police Department, and a couple of guys from other surrounding agencies, and they're the ones that kind of pushed me in the direction of law enforcement. Not as a way to replace my current profession, because they knew what I did for a living, but I really enjoyed combatives and defensive tactics, and I spent a lot of time investing a lot of time into the police officers who are my students, and they said, there's a way for you to really get into this world to give back to law enforcement, to teach them, but you're probably going to have to become a police officer yourself to penetrate that world. And so that's what I did. There was an evening police academy that became available, that was a lot longer than the traditional academy, because the traditional academy is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. This was in the evenings from 5 p.m. until 10 p.m., Monday through Friday, and then all day Saturday. So it took longer to get through, but it was the full curriculum, full academy. That was the only way I was able to get through the academy, because it didn't interfere with my medical practice. And so that's how I got into law enforcement.
So when you were, you were teaching police officers at the beginning, and I think there's a rule in the U.S. that police officers are not taught directly from civilians in the academy, right?
Yeah, for the most part, in order to, because I was not teaching in the academy as a civilian. Police officers were just coming to learn combatives in a school that I was teaching at. So that was my interaction with them, but I was not teaching in any sort of official capacity as a civilian, in a police academy setting when I was a civilian. You're absolutely right. In order to teach in the academy, it has to be under two scenarios. One, you have to be a licensed, in the state of Texas, it's a Texas Commission on Law Enforcement instructor. And in order to teach, police officers, or you have to be teaching under the auspices of a credentialed, policing instructor in order to, provide courses. Occasionally, academies, usually in the context of continuing education, will bring in, outside groups to come in and teach, tactics, particularly very popular amongst firearms and firearms tactics and various defensive tactics. And a lot of these guys, they come from the military world. They're not, they're not affiliated with a particular police agency. And so, but, they will be brought in under the auspices of a credentialed police instructor. And that's how they get in, if they're going to be teaching within the academy. Now, outside, there's much more, freedom in how that education is disseminated. But within the structure of a police academy and a police agency, they require it to be done under the auspices of a credentialed policing instructor.
Okay. Now, the reason why I asked that question is because when I remember back in the day when I was living in Canada, there was this proliferation of these so-called official police trainers and tactical trainers and military trainers directly for the SEALs, directly for the SWAT team. And I was like, geez, man, is this for real that every one of these guys is an official trainer for the police department? How is that even possible? How many trainers officially do they have? It's very strange. So it seems to be just like some marketing hype that was going on at that time, but it was very popular back in the day to say that kind of stuff and make those claims, So, okay, very interesting. And how did you get into martial arts in the first place? Where did you start with this?
Wow, well, I'm 50 years old now. I started when I was 12 years old. Started training formally. My parents took me to a Kempo Academy in Pittsburgh,
Oh.
Pennsylvania. That's how I got my start. Because I was getting bullied in school, so
Yeah,
I thought that was
gotta
the best
learn
solution.
that karate, right?
That's right. So that's how I got started, and I I spent many years in Kempo, and then I eventually developed a real interest in the Japanese martial arts. Studied Daito-ryu Aikido-Jujitsu for a while, and then entered this system called Sento-ryu Aikido-Jujitsu, which is a more combative expression, I'd say, of traditional Daito-ryu.
Okay.
I studied in that system for almost 25 years.
Seriously, wow.
Yeah. So I earned a 6 down there, and then during my time through through training in that system, I met Guru Dan and Sifu Paul Vunak. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah.
I'm a full instructor under Sifu Paul, and so taught his curriculum for a while. And there's another gentleman in the combatives community that had a real influence on me. His name is Hawk Hakan with the Scientific Fighting Congress. He lives about 40 minutes from me, and so
He's still active?
I'm sorry?
Is he still active?
Oh, yes, very much. Yeah. So I trained through his curriculum and taught a lot of his material in my school. He was a former homicide detective, and so he attracts a lot of law enforcement, and so that was kind of the bread and butter of what I was teaching for many years until I saw Guru Dan in Los Angeles. I went there for a seminar. Was just really fascinated by, his system, and found one of his senior instructors in the Dallas area, who's been with him for over 30 years, and then through him, I learned the Inosano curriculum, and so and it was through there that I was introduced to Silat, and developed such a fascination with the beauty of the system. And I asked him, I really want to study this particular part of the Inosano curriculum more, and he said, find the best Silat teacher that you can find and go study with him. And I found you. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Very, very amazing, because you've got a long background, that very, very interesting background, because many people, that I encounter, they have a background in martial arts, but it's not that deep in a specific art, because there's this mentality nowadays. You only need to learn bits and pieces of everything. You don't need to master anything anymore. And I think this is complete nonsense. You have to, it's like a tea, you have a broad knowledge of everything, but you have a very deep knowledge in a specific domain. And this is how it was in the old days. And that's the way that I learned also. You have specific domain knowledge, but you have a general idea of what's going on around you and other systems and what people are doing. But now it's like people have they treat it like a buffet, 6 months of karate, 6 months of jujitsu, another 8 months of MMA, and then let me throw it together, call it Aikido, and then make a new school,
That's right.
So how do you feel about the whole mix and match buffet martial arts environment going on?
I think that it confuses the student. I don't think that there's anything wrong with borrowing from any system. Everybody has different sizes, shapes, heights, and so the way that they ultimately express their art may look a little different than somebody else. But I think that if they don't have a foundation, in a system, there'll always be a sense of incompleteness in their training. And I know a lot of guys that that bounce around different systems, and that's fine. Hawk used to tell us all the time that study a system completely, find something that resonates with you, and then if it makes sense from a functional standpoint, then anything else you study, you'll be able to look through the lens of that which is functional, be able to tell, well, that would work for me. That would not work for me. That would get me in trouble. That doesn't. And I think that was I think that was a good approach. I think there are numerous wonderful martial arts systems. I think it's helpful to study one system completely. Certainly to become proficient in all the ranges of combat and develop attributes. And then if one finds an interest in a particular area, then I think it's helpful to then look into other systems that would support the particular areas of interest that they have.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree with you on that. Totally agree with it. Okay, let's move into our next topic, and that's tactical medicine. I mean, you are a tactical medic. So how did this happen, and what's the reasoning behind it? How did you get into it? How did you get into the medical aspect of policing?
Yes, so I have been a family medicine and critical care nurse practitioner for almost for 20 years now, actually, since 2000. And I started my career as a paramedic. In the 90s, I trained at the Center for Emergency Medicine, where they developed the national curriculum for paramedics in the United States, and then functioned as a paramedic right outside the city of Pittsburgh for many years. And then after several years, I transitioned into, I became, a nurse, and then a respiratory therapist, and then a nurse practitioner. And so that was kind of then my trajectory into institutionalized hospital medicine. But I never lost the love for emergency medicine, particularly in the field. And so as a critical care nurse practitioner, I spend a lot of time in the ICUs and in the emergency rooms over the past many years. And so had left the field part of emergency medicine behind for a while. Then when I got into the police academy, we were discussing a topic on patrol tactics, and the police academy instructor was talking about tactical medicine and how that looks in the United States. And that immediately, piqued my interest in how law enforcement and medicine, is merged. Here in the United States, tactical medicine is an emerging and an evolving specialty. I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but I think we're still in the infancy of its evolution as compared to the military. And with respect to SWAT operations, for instance, or any type of special response teams, usually if they get called out to a event, a SWAT call out, usually they will position on the perimeter a team of paramedics or an ambulance. And if officer gets shot, if he gets hurt, they have to drag the officer from the hot zone all the way to the paramedics. Sometimes, if the officer has a traumatic neck wound, if they have a tension pneumothorax, sometimes they don't make it to the paramedics in time. And so to have an operator on a team that can perform advanced interventions like a surgical airway, like decompressing a pneumothorax, is can truly make the difference between life and death, for an operator and a special team that goes down, during a SWAT call out. So, this is something that's, again, that's evolving, but they do not have, there are very few teams in the United States that actually have police officers that have advanced trained providers that can actually perform these skills in the field. They rely, of course, on the paramedics and getting the officer to the paramedics when that happens. Hopefully, we're hoping like in the next 10 years that's going to change. There's a set of guidelines called the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Guidelines.
Those are the ones derived from the military, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I spoke with one of the co-authors of those guidelines as it applies to courses that are now being developed for police officers, for law enforcement. It's toned down to the first aid level, and thank God for first responders and those who do first aid. They're that they're absolutely necessary. But built within that curriculum is also allowances and training for advanced providers to be able to form highly technical procedures in the field that can save lives and traumatic injuries. So one of these co-authors is an emergency medicine physician and a police officer. He's in Seattle, and he told me that it's again, this is there's a lot of work to be done in law enforcement in developing this model. There are some agencies now that have tactical response units where they actually have paramedics that are deputized, or the paramedics that are police officers.
Yeah.
But it's very, very far and few between.
It's interesting that you say it's in the infancy in the United States. I think it's buried everywhere else still. It's still at the zombie level in other places. I mean, when I compare to the US compared to other places, like in Canada, it was the same. When I compare the United States with what was going on in Canada or what's going on in Japan or other locations I've been in, I think you guys are like in space and we're still buried underground with our training in other places. So no matter how bad you think it is, you still got it better off than everyone else. Wow. So what do you think is a better choice, though, in your opinion? You think it's better to have a paramedic, like, for example, somebody who comes from a medical background who is going into the policing environment and gets trained for that, or a police officer who goes and gets trained for into a medical environment? Which one do you think is a better choice? Which way is a better choice?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are very few police officers that get training as a paramedic. That's just not something that's really common. It's not really common for paramedics to become police officers. So I think either way is a great way. As I've told when I was in SWAT school, I interacted with the instructors a lot. Outside of the formal teaching environment, about what their experience was in teaching, officers from surrounding agencies. And, this is, something that is, again, still rapidly, developing. And I'm just shocked that there's not more type A personalities that you typically find in the critical care and ER setting, that those type of guys, that go into law enforcement. There's still a bit of a disconnect between law enforcement and medicine, and I don't know what it is. People think it's a contradiction for me to be doing both. I just ask them to look at the military. There are physicians who carry guns all day long, so it's native to that. So
it's so true. When I was in the academy in Canada, I know, because we train with the police officers together, so there's like the police academy in the same college with police training in the same college with the paramedic training. So I had a good opportunity to meet a lot of those guys. And one of the things that I noticed as a difference is that in the paramedic section, the paramedics are given the option to take a look at all different types of possibilities in terms of being a medic and what you can specialize in. For example, bariatric problems, or bariatric teams, tactical teams. We take a look at search and rescue. There's so many different options. On the police side, they never once were like, okay, you know what? There are different options for a police officer. You could be a tactical medic. You could be a this. They never even heard anything about medicine. Nothing. We're just there to support them. But they never had the idea of letting them actually come in and work with us to be able to learn what we're doing. It didn't go the other way. But we got to learn what they were doing. We had tactical medics that came to us, and police officers and SWAT officers that came to us to help us to understand what happens in a tactical team, what are the operational procedures, et cetera, and then things. But the reverse way never happened. So I think it's a matter of education more than anything else, the way the education is set up. So
yeah, getting the healthcare community, particularly those in the area of emergency medicine and critical care, really getting them more involved in or more educated in the tactical medicine world, and how this would be such an important addition to to what they do, so hopefully that will change. This whole this whole area of tactical medicine will look much different in 5 years in the United States, hopefully, than it does now.
Considering that they're deriving a lot of the curriculum from the tactical casualty care from the military, do you think that there's a threat that the police organizations will become too militaristic in terms of their application of those procedures and strategies and tactics and things like that? Is there a risk of over militarizing the police?
That's a really good question. I don't think that there's a concern of over militarization of the police when it comes to medical care. I think that the utilization of the skills learned in the TCCC curriculum, it's just really going to enable the people within the law enforcement community to much better care for critically ill people in the in combat. I don't think it will make the the police officer more militarized in a in a negative sense. I think that just better equip them to to care for the type of injuries that that's just native to what is seen in combat in the military. So, but I don't think it will be a negative in that way.
That's a good answer, because then now we don't need to defund you, So. God help us if we defund you guys. Jeez.
That's right.
Good Lord. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So if you had to choose like one direction, like right now, I'd cut you in half, and you got to just you got to make one choice. It's either medicine or it's policing. Where would you go?
Oh my goodness.
So it's a hard choice.
My wife tells all my friends that I went back to the police academy because I was going through a midlife crisis. I love law enforcement. I really do. Sometimes I think that I missed my calling. I just they're so different. I've been in clinical practice doing medicine for 20 years now, and law enforcement, 8 years. I just been police for a minute. That's what Jeff would probably say. I think they're both unique. Now doing both of them on a regular basis, I couldn't imagine, leaving one. First inclination is probably medicine, because that's what I know the best. But I couldn't imagine not being a police officer. They're going to have to strip the gun out of my hand when I'm 80 or 90. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love to see the dedication, man. That's really awesome. Fabulous. So now, okay, you're a police officer, but now you've been promoted to a deputy, right? You're no longer a low-level police officer. You're high class. Right. You're high class. So now that you're a deputy,
don't let that Chicago cop hear that.
Now that you're a deputy, and you've gone up in the ranks, you've got your place. You're the official popo now in your area.
That's right.
So how do you feel about that? What was the process? And tell us a little bit about what you had to go through in order to get to that position.
That was an almost 12-month application. That was horrendous. When I initially started, I was a patrol officer with a small agency, and I remember, submitting my application in a on a month of October, and then I got a call back the following year in February from an investigator that handled the applications for new deputies. And he said, "Are you interested in pursuing this?" I said, "Yeah." And so he told me where to show up. I went to the sheriff's office, and And so I was introduced to one of the captains there in the department, and they took me into the small office where these nice ladies were serving me coffee, and I thought I was just going to go into his office, and have a chit chat. He told me to walk down the hall, and he said, "There's a door at the end of the hall, and just walk through there, and I'll be there in just a minute." I thought that was his office.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down there, walked in the room, and it was a small amphitheater, and I was staring 23 command staff in the face. And, there was a little microphone and a chair, and I literally almost turned around and walked out and said, I think I'm in the wrong place. They said, no, you're in the right place. So the application process started with a very, very grueling, oral board. The first question came from the chaplain of the sheriff's office,
mm-hmm.
wanting to know, what I would do if I was attacked with a knife at 3 o'clock in the morning with a guy from, a different ethnic persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Like that had anything to do with what the color of his skin was. But,
mm-hmm.
And then it just became more invasive from there, So,
mm-hmm.
I felt like I was totally beaten up and, and shredded. And so I left when they were finished with me, and, the captain tapped me on the back and he said, "Well, you did a good job, son. They did that on purpose."
Oh man, a hellish panel interview. That's a good way to open it up. Yeah. So
mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So after that, then, I was called back there was a physical fitness test, physical agility test. And then if you passed that, there was a written exam. And then then they submitted you to a polygraph examination. That was fun. And then after the polygraph, I had to do an all day. There was a psych eval that took literally 8 hours. They must have asked us 500 questions, to do these, these written tests and assessments. And then we had to meet with the psychiatrist that was assigned to the staff, where he asked us, all kinds of questions. So, and then there was a background investigation that I told you about, afterwards. And it was, that was the most invasive experience I've ever had. They dipped into every closet in my life that possibly could be looked in. So
yeah. It's funny, when we were discussing that previously, you mentioned about the invasiveness of the process like that, where they were talking to your martial arts instructors, et cetera, et cetera. They contacted everybody. You might find that to be invasive in the United States. You guys have a very strong sense of personal privacy and freedoms and sense like that. In Canada, actually, that would be very normal. If I wanted to get a gun license in Canada, this is a normal procedure. They will contact your family members, your neighbors, your friends, your boss, and ask them, can this guy have a gun? So yeah, sure, as long as it doesn't come to the office, So it's actually quite normal for the RCMP to do that to Canadian citizens. It's pretty normal. And it's one of the things that the gun right activists in Canada have a big problem about, is how invasive all of these kind of things and the difficulty of it. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's a good thing in terms of, people who are looking to have a firearm? Do you think that's a good thing to have that kind of level of interrogation of an individual?
Oh, absolutely. Without question. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think in the United States, particularly in law enforcement, if you're going to give somebody the right to take somebody's rights away, and give them, that kind of power from a, policing standpoint, I think that the law enforcement agency should do everything in their power to make sure that, they vet, a candidate for law enforcement to make sure that, they're safe and suitable to carry a gun and a badge, because unfortunately that authority has been abused. And a lot of people have lost their lives over that abuse. And a lot of lives have been hurt horribly because of that power being abused by somebody who should have never been given a gun and a badge in the first place.
Yes, exactly. And, that's in terms of a police officer. But when it comes to a civilian in the United States, basically with a driver's license, I believe in the US, you can go to Walmart or wherever it is and buy a firearm. So from perspective of from my perspective, I look at that kind of a situation and I see that as giving a person almost the same level of power as a police officer, because a gun is power, regardless of who is holding it. When you point it in my face, you have power.
No, that's
So,
true.
how do you feel about that on a civilian level?
Well, it's at the civilian level, it's much more involved, than normally than just submitting a driver's license. You have to have a valid ID, of course, but then you're submitted to a very, very comprehensive background investigation. It's done electronically,
Hmm.
and so it's done through a national database.
Even in
And
Texas.
Oh yes, yeah, everywhere in the United States. You have to clear that background investigation before you'll be sold, a firearm.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, in different parts of the U.S., the requirements for obtaining a concealed carry license
Hmm.
vary. In Texas, you have to go through a course. You have to shoot, at a qualification in order to obtain a concealed carry license. They want to actually make sure you know how to point the gun in the right direction and operate a firearm, basically.
Hmm.
Now, if you go to a concealed carry course in the United States, just a basic, carry course, they're going to
Hmm.
tell you this course is not designed to make you a firearms expert
Hmm.
or overly proficient. We want to make sure you're safe in utilizing this weapon and know the laws of when and when not to use it. So, but you do have to, pass, a basic firearms qualification in order to get a concealed carry license. Now, in Pennsylvania, once you pass the background investigation, you just have to go to a courthouse and they they issue a permit,
Hmm.
which I think is not a good idea, at all.
Hmm.
I think if a person is going to get a concealed carry license, or if they're going to get a permit to carry, that there should be some sort of formal instruction for no shoot scenarios, where they can carry a gun, where they can't carry a gun, how
Yeah.
to interact with law enforcement when they're
Yeah.
pulled over for a traffic stop.
Yeah.
And those are critically important, pieces of information that need to be taught to a person applying for a gun permit. And not all
Mm.
states are uniform in that. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Absolutely agree with you on that. I mean, I can't see how anybody could be allowed to carry a gun, walk around and concealed carry and be able to walk around without having proper training. And it's not only for a gun, it's for a knife or for any weapon you carry. If you don't have proper training with it, you're a detriment to yourself and other people. So it's no
Yes.
benefit. So I totally agree with you on that one. Okay, I mean, let's move over to the martial arts side now of things. Now, in terms of martial arts, what is your choice for training? If you would just be starting fresh now, and you had to advise everybody now and tell them, like this is what I would start with, and this is what you guys would start with. Where would you start if you, from all your knowledge now, where would you advise the next generation to start? I don't think it's going to be Kenpo karate for sure.
No.
Okay.
No. No. I know a lot of good Kempo guys, but that's not
Mm.
what I. So, I think defensive tactics for law enforcement really has to be um, designed specifically to the needs of a police officer.
Mhm.
For instance, in the school that I taught a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, not sport Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Mm.
I had my students who were police officers when I had law enforcement only classes. I would have them ground fight in gear in their kits,
Yes.
and it's a lot different shrimping with a big kit on your back with armor than it is on a nice soft mat.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, um, so I think there is benefit from a number of different systems. Any type of good ground fighting system, whether it be Sambo, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, Judo,
Hmm.
that has a good ground component, to it, catcher's can wrestling,
Yeah.
all in Western mat wrestling, or
Hmm.
any other ground system that teaches, how to control a person, on the
Hmm.
ground.
Yes.
Many times, you know, in my personal experience, particularly when I've dealt with resisting subjects by myself, I felt safest when I had them controlled on the ground. If a police officer, understands basic principles in controlling a person on the ground, so that they can restrain them, I think those are very, very important, things to learn. So they don't have to pursue a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the equivalent in another ground system. But I think that there's very, very key techniques and attributes that they need to develop to be proficient in controlling a man. And I think that is one of the big takeaways from ground fighting. So the next is being proficient with standing up in all ranges of combat, the punching range, the kicking range, the clinch, fancy kicking in martial arts, particularly in the street, is not a safe thing. Particularly if you're on asphalt, or you're in the snow, or you're in mud. That's just not very wise, in my opinion. But I think that learning how to be proficient in those areas is important. And again, also for restraining somebody standing up is important. So and I think developing good attributes in terms of striking is extremely important for the police officer. And being in an environment where they're training in systems that subject them to pressure, and I think that is a very, very critical piece that I think is lacking in a lot of combatives training. And so particularly for the law enforcement officer, if he goes into a profession where there's a good chance that he's going to be fighting at any given time in the shift, or he's going to have to fight for his gun, God forbid. It's important that he understands and knows what it feels like to be picked up and thrown on the ground, what it feels like to be punched. And I think systems that subject a person to that type of pressure, I think is really, really important in developing their attributes and their tenacity to withstand that type of pressure in real world combat. So I hope that answers your question.
Definitely it does. I mean, in comparison, I mean, what you're saying is very logical, and I can see you broke it down. It's obvious you've got a lot of experience. You've broken it down very logically into different components, and I really appreciate that. And I think the listeners do also for this. In comparison to the regular police training tactics, how do you feel that things are? I mean, when you look at police defensive tactics training, the ones that you need to do for certification on a yearly basis, when you compare that to the training that you've done, how do you compare that? Is there a comparison, or is it just like, this is really terrible,
No, it's highly lacking, highly lacking, unfortunately. When you get trained as a police officer, there's so much that you have to learn. But defensive tactics, is not something that is, overly emphasized, unfortunately. And I think that one of the most important things that a police officer must do, particularly if they're on patrol, if they're out policing in the streets, they must, be dedicated to continuing education and combatives. They have to, this is life insurance for them. They can't take one, 16-hour defensive tactics segment, once a year. That may or may not truly give them any, useful information. And some of the state law enforcement defensive tactics, training curriculum is outdated. I got in trouble in the police academy because when we were doing the defensive tactics section, they were doing knife defense, and the the instructor was teaching, a series of techniques, and I was holding my head, talking to myself, saying that that's going to get you killed. You can't do that. So, I think that, and I think this is changing. This is changing, in law enforcement, but there has to be a definite commitment to, continuing education, for law enforcement officers. And not all defensive tactic training is created equal. I know some police officers that have went to some academies that, had really good defensive tactics instruction, and they were very experienced martial artists before becoming a police officer, and they were shocked. They said that, and then, went to talked to some folks that, went through a great academy, but that part of the academy was lacking, so I think there's a lot of improvement that needs to be made in this area. And I don't think a police officer, particularly if they have to fight for a living, is they can't get enough training, in this. And a lot of them are in a catch-22 situation. They're not paid a lot of money, and they're put into extraordinarily dangerous situations. And a lot of times they have to get this training on their own dime and nickel, and that is a real problem.
That's hardcore. So vicious to do something like that. Yeah, totally agree with you. I have a personal opinion about this, and you can correct me if you think that this is wrong. I from traveling around, I've seen a lot of different police officers all over the place, and the United States being one of them. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there are less officer-involved shootings and things like that in other countries than there are in the United States. And one of the reasons that I think that United States, U.S. police officers have a problem is because of the lack of combative skills, which in other countries, it's a primary focus for a police officer to be highly skilled in physical combatives. So they can easily manipulate and deal with most individuals that they meet on the street. Most people are not as good police officers as you would find in most of these police teams around the world. Not everywhere, but a lot of places. Thailand is a good example. Malaysia is a good example. Indonesia is a good example. I mean, these people are highly skilled. China is another good example. Hong Kong police are crazy in terms of their skills in martial arts, for example. Taiwan, unfortunately, didn't impress me very much, but they were a little bit shoddy. But do you think that plays a part in terms of the police officer first reaching for their gun because they're not as comfortable being in a fight with another individual?
Oh, without question. Oh, without question. I think there is a natural inclination to index a firearm, and when confronted with any type of aggression. I think yes, I think that happens quite a bit, and I think a big problem is training, and unfortunately, when we travel along the use of force continuum, a lot of guys, will jump to their firearm before they reach for their taser, or a less lethal option. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. It does happen.
Yes.
And they suffer the consequences for that, but it does happen. And I'm the first person to try never ever to, Monday quarterback a guy who was in that situation, had to make that decision, at the, within seconds. But I think that, again, the lack of tactical training, particularly in empty hand combatives, is, causes a lot of problems in law enforcement. I think if they had more training in this area, more emphasis was put, on empty hand combatives in a real way, on a regular way, I think that you would see police officers not shying away from their weapon by any means, but exhausting many other options before indexing their firearm to resolve a situation.
So have you ever been in a situation like that with an officer who was less skilled than you are and who did react in that way?
Yes.
You have. Okay. And how did that situation go down?
not well.
Yeah.
So, you know, so,
Okay.
it was, it was, it was I went to a domestic disturbance, and a guy showed up, and the guy who, brutally battered his wife. She
Hmm.
was a bloody mess when I got there.
Yeah.
And I told him to step outside, and told him he was under arrest, and he started to fight me. And so we were on the ground, and this guy showed up, officer, and he just wasn't doing much. I was like, hey.
Help me out, yo.
So I don't know why he was there. So and he eventually, got involved after I was yelling at him, but that should have not have been, So
Yep.
I shouldn't have had to, exerted that much effort, in doing that. So,
Yeah.
and he was new, but still, it was
Still.
a little frustrating, So, and
Exactly.
that could have gone very, very bad, very quick. Thank God it didn't.
Yeah.
That is not a comfortable situation where you really need help,
Yes.
and you're not getting it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got your guy right next to you, you're like, bro, you could do a little bit more than eating pizza on the corner, Jeez.
So,
All right. Now, when we are looking at the street situations, what has been some of the most difficult, or maybe one of the most difficult situations that you faced on the street personally? And what lesson did you learn from that? How did you overcome it?
I've been in a lot of terrible situations,
Mhm.
and thank God I'm still sitting here. But
Something memorable
uh,
that really sticks in the mind.
as probably a traffic stop at
Hmm.
in the middle of the night, from a guy who did not know, when I pulled him over. Did not know. I ran his information through dispatch, and um, there was no indication that he was a violent offender.
Hmm.
But that information came later on during the interview,
Hmm.
and he was making all kinds of furtive movements in the car. I got real nervous. I told him to get out of the car, because I was very, very concerned that he was looking for a gun.
Hmm.
So and then when he came out, when I took him out, and I wanted to, I was I told him I was just going to detain him, that I was going to arrest him. It was just for my safety, and his, and he decided to fight at that point, and I was new, and it otherwise was just a routine traffic stop.
Yeah.
It was in a bad part of town, and I think I should have waited, for another unit to come before I pulled him out,
Hmm.
of the car. So he ran, and we eventually got the guy. He got away from me, but eventually caught him. But that was probably the most harrowing experience, because I was running through all the scenarios in my mind. What if nobody showed up?
Hmm.
What if he got my gun? And we're in a bad part of town, right in the middle of the night, and that was foolish of me as a new officer. I should not have done that. The chief of police had a long conversation with me, the following day.
Yeah.
So, so it was just, so that was one of the most scariest experiences, because those kind of guys that he really did not care whether he lived or died. It's those kind of guys that
Hmm.
does not matter how many badges you wear, they're very
Yeah.
happy to kill you.
Yeah.
So that was probably the most you know harrowing experience. And I have many more years in law enforcement. That I was just a young cop, and
Yeah.
uh, as I was told, I was young and dumb. So
But definitely lessons learned. Lessons learned, man.
I'll never make that mistake. At least I'll
Yeah.
try.
Okay. Now, I don't know about you, but I guess this is going to be a little bit controversial now. So, for myself, I have a pretty, I don't know, I guess it would be really not politically correct at all to say this or do this, but I believe in judging every book by its cover. So basically, you mentioned to go through a difficult neighborhood, troubled neighborhood, whatever it is that we can call it in a polite term. It's a ghetto, okay, regardless. And people are armed and people are usually dangerous in those areas more than in other places if I'm strolling through a suburb somewhere or driving through a suburb. Um, I judge every book by its cover. If I see some gangbanger looking guy on the street and he starts following me, or I'm driving past them and they start making their crip signs or whatever at you, I take those things very seriously. And if I go into a situation as a medic and I start to see individuals like that, I pay a lot more attention to them than I do the guy over there with the suit on and the crisp glasses. Okay, I judge every book by its cover. I know it's not politically correct, and I should be profiling people and all of this before I go onto a scene. But I do because I want to stay alive, and I don't really care what politicians say. But what do you feel about that? Do you do that also? Is it something that is required, or am I stepping over my bounds?
No, no, no. I think that um, the idea of racial profiling has to be understood in a very, very, very careful context.
Mhm.
And that is, whether it doesn't matter what color of skin the person has.
Yeah,
I'm going to treat them exactly the same.
yeah.
If a person, let's say, I run their identification, and they have a history of fighting with police,
Mhm.
I'm going to automatically approach them and deal with them a little differently than I would, with somebody else, who
Mhm.
doesn't have that history. So in that sense, there's some profiling there. Now that does not mean I'm going to be, unlawful and
Yeah,
ridiculously
for
aggressive with
sure.
them, but I'm going to be highly cautious and make some assumptions that I would make if they were otherwise a law-abiding citizen. So,
Mhm.
in my mind, that's that's how profiling would look, in law enforcement, looking at situations in a tactical way that
Mhm.
that would engender harm to the officer. They're going to profile that situation or
Mhm.
individual in a certain way, in how they're going to appropriately deal with them.
Mhm.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, for me, I've been out of North America for a very long time, so I'm a lot less politically correct than I was 25 years ago. So, so it was a loaded question, but it's good. You gave a very good answer. That's awesome. Okay. Um, the next thing I'd like to know is like when you're looking at EDC situations for civilians and things like that, EDC gear and things like that for civilians. What would you say is a good EDC gear for a civilian in your environment over there?
So because this is a gun toting country,
Mhm.
in most states, I would say to a person who is going to carry, and you're talking about a firearm, conductor?
Anything. I'm talking about
Anything?
the EDC tools. What would you
Okay,
consider to be good for a civilian in your
okay,
environment?
okay. I think that having a good knife is absolutely necessary. Um, and
Why necessary in a gun environment like Texas?
well, it is not an equalizer, but I think that if you are not committed to having the appropriate mindset of actually utilizing a gun, if you're put into a situation of utilizing the weapon, I don't think it's a good idea that you carry a firearm. Um, if you aren't, if you aren't training regularly, with that gun
Hmm.
on a continual basis, I think that it can be a liability, to you ultimately, if you're not really proficient, in utilizing it. There's there's a lot of accidental shootings, that happen, and there's a lot of guys that get taken advantage of, and their guys get taken away, their guns get taken away from them, they get shot. I think it's a tremendous privilege to be able to get a permit to carry a gun, but I think that sometimes people get permits to carry a gun just to say that they have a gun on them. When they don't train with a firearm at all, they're not proficient in it at all, and if they had to use it to protect themselves or an innocent person, many times they just wouldn't do it, so I think that those things have to be really understood, in carrying carrying a firearm. But certainly, minus the firearm, I think a knife is important. If people are walking around at night, I think a good tactical flashlight, is very important, to carry. My two go-tos, minus the firearm. I don't think it's a bad idea at all to carry a first aid kit in your car. With a couple of tourniquets, and pressure dressings. I think that's very, 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 very important. So I think that would be, an extended tool that you keep in your vehicle. I think is important. Always have access to it, as
awesome.
reasonably as possible.
Awesome. So in closing now, I'd like to ask you one last question. And as a police officer, what do you think is the most dangerous aspect of policing in your opinion? So is it domestic calls? Is it dealing with criminals on the road? Is it what aspect of your job is really, do you find that is very, very dangerous, the most dangerous?
I think the two most dangerous type of situations, for the patrol officer, is the domestic call and traffic stops. I cannot tell you how many police officers who've had violent encounters on a traffic stop. They did 300 traffic stops before then, and they were just routine, and they were like going through the motions, and they were not approaching a vehicle tactically. They were not observing what was going on in the car, and on that 301st traffic stop, they just lackadaisically walked up to the driver's side and got shot. It's very dangerous. One of the most dangerous things police officers do, and it's very easy for a police officer to get complacent in doing traffic stops. Something that can go from an innocuous asking for identification to a life and death situation immediately. And so that's very dangerous. And I mentioned, the two situations because, on the domestic disturbance situation, this is also something that can be so volatile, and frequently family members will turn on the police. You wouldn't believe, you got two brothers beating the living heck out of each other, and then you show up, and then the two bloody guys turn on the police officer, because you interfered. That's also very dangerous. You're going into their home, their environment, and in their house are their weapons, and so it's it can be extremely, extremely dangerous.
Yeah. Did you find the same thing when you were a medic working over there? Because as a medic, every call is a domestic call, right?
Yes. Yes, been in very, very dangerous situations as a paramedic. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, in Canada already, it was a shitstorm. In Malaysia, it was a shitstorm. But I can imagine in the US already, it's much worse with everybody carrying a gun in Texas. Oh my God.
Every grandmother carrying a weapon. That's right. Yeah.
Oh man, it's a headache just thinking about it. Oh jeez. Now let's finish off. Okay, I got a little bit of a game to play with you now. Basically, I'm going to give you 5 words. Okay, and I want you to tell me immediately what you think when you hear the word. Okay, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Number 1, Mexican cartels.
Danger.
Italian mafia.
No. Unknown. I have no interaction with them, so
No interaction.
Okay. They're probably equally as dangerous. I don't think.
All right. Okay. Concealed carry.
Necessary.
Necessary. No carry. Or forbidden carry, like in other countries.
Oh. And we're talking about a firearm?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Combatives.
Okay. All right. And last one, number 5, open carry. Anything you want.
Interesting.
Very. Yeah. Yemen, basically Yemen or Somalia. Whatever you want to carry, you can go. I think in the US, in Texas, you have open carry also, right? If you want to go with a rifle and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
Just go in the McDonald's with the AK on the back, no issues.
Yeah, well, we definitely have issues with them. They get they but there's there isn't a very good reason. If you see a guy in McDonald's with who looks a little tattered with an AK-47 or an AR on his back,
It's
that's
still an
probably
issue.
a good sign something is bad's about to happen.
Okay. All right.
So
it's still an issue. It's still an issue.
Still an issue. Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. The world hasn't collapsed yet. It's still an issue to have an AK in McDonald's. Good. Perfect, brother. I want to say thank you to you for doing this interview. I really enjoyed myself, and I really appreciate your time so much. Really, it's valuable, and you gave us an hour of your life, and that's really amazing. Thank you for teaching us today, and you are the Pendekar today. So, salam hormat, Pencak Silat. We appreciate it so much, your time. I'm sure a couple of the brothers have questions also for you. So let's just take a gander at our questions over here. Or what